Hello, I'm Malvina Eydelman, CEO of the Collaborative Community on Ophthalmic Innovation, CCOI. We are proud to partner with Mary Tyler Moore Vision Initiative to launch the DRD Cure Accelerator. Mary Tyler Moore wasn't just an icon. She was a patient. Her story centers us. It reminds us exactly what this work is about: restoring vision, preserving independence, and delivering real impact for real people. At CCOI, we're not chasing abstract metrics. We're embedding the patient voice into every decision. Because if it doesn't improve lives, it isn't progress. With this partnership, we have a chance to transform the future of diabetic retinal disease, and we intend to do just that. CCOI is driven by a bold mission to remove every barrier standing between groundbreaking ophthalmic medical products and the patients who need them worldwide. We exist to accelerate the future of eye care. The DRD Cure Accelerator is one of CCOI's 17 working groups, each advancing a specific goal, all united in driving forward our shared mission. Breakthroughs in science and clinical research are only the beginning. For these innovations to actually benefit patients, they must be translated into safe, effective medical products, approved and accessible on the market, and delivered to patients. Without approved or cleared medical products, even the most promising science stays in the lab, and patients see no change in outcomes. The path to patient impact runs through innovation, development, regulation, and adoption. Regulation of medical products varies significantly across countries, and it results in different requirements with different data for demonstration of safety and effectiveness and different administrative procedures. What remains the same is that all national regulatory frameworks classify medical products into 4 fundamental categories: drugs, devices, biologics, and combination products. Medical products are essential at every step of DRD care continuum. We need them to screen, diagnose, assess progression of, and treat DRD. Medical products are also essential to enable clinical research and evaluation. In the United States, screening for DRD often occurs with teleretinal devices. However, currently, none have indications specific for DRD. We are incredibly fortunate that today in the United States, we have 3 AI machine learning devices for screening. Their indications for use are summarized on this slide. There are many devices on the market that are cleared to aid in diagnosis of DRD and ocular disease, such as OCT, OCTA, fundus photography, fluorescein angiography, ultrawide fundus photography, electrodiagnostic devices. However, currently, there are no medical products that are specifically approved or cleared for diagnosis of DRD. There are currently no FDA cleared or approved medical products specifically indicated for tracking DRD disease progression over time. Current practice relies on subjective interpretation non-standardized imaging biomarkers, or clinical endpoints applied inconsistently due to lack of consensus. Lack of progression-specific tools slows clinical decision-making, impacts trial design, and hampers innovation. Currently, in the United States, between 2006 and 2025, 14 drugs received approval for DRD treatment. As far as devices, we have devices cleared for laser photocoagulation in diabetic retinopathy, as well as intraocular retinal photocoagulation as an adjunct to vitrectomy surgery. We do not currently have any biologics or any combination products on the market specific for DRD treatment. Well, why is it that we have such a significant DRD medical product deficit on the market? Current practice relies on subjective interpretation, non-standardized imaging biomarkers, or clinical endpoints applied inconsistently due to lack of consensus. There's a lack of progression-specific tools that is slowing down the clinical decision-making, impacting trial design, and hampering innovation. Medical products don't get to patients on science alone. They require a foundation of standards, guidance, and consensus. Standards outline preclinical testing and recommended clinical trials, and the FDA utilizes a recognition process to show which standard FDA recognized for use in satisfying a pre-market submission requirement. Guidance describes regulators' interpretation of or policy on a regulatory issue. Unfortunately, in the United States, the only guidance specific for diabetic retinopathy is a draft guidance from 2008. There are also no standards specific for DRD medical products, either at the US or international level. There are a number of relevant standards that I have summarized on the slide. However, once again, I want to emphasize that no standard specific for DRD medical products exists today. The goal for CCOI Cure Accelerator is to generate global consensus on endpoints and biomarkers for DRD diagnosis, risk prediction, progression, and treatment efficacy assessment. We are going to engage stakeholders through the CCOI Cure Accelerator to build agreement on clinically meaningful, scientifically sound endpoints that we then can translate into consensus and eventual standards. The standards will then be adopted by regulators worldwide and enable faster, harmonized approval of effective DRD medical product and eventually reach our goal of accelerating access to innovation for patients worldwide. Step one in our process is listening to the ecosystem. To build meaningful endpoints, we need to start by surveying critical voices. We need to listen to patients and caregivers and ask them what outcomes matter most to them. What defines meaningful change in their daily life? We need to ask innovators and developers what's needed to translate discovery into approved products, and what are the current roadblocks in defining and validating endpoints. This input will anchor the process in real-world relevance and ensure that regulatory and commercial viability from the start. we are very excited to announce our partnership with NADA. Through AI-powered surveys, NADA captures stakeholder insights rapidly and with precision, ensuring that the voices of patients, clinicians, and innovators directly shape meaningful progress. NADA gives everyone a voice at scale. It enables instant digital focus groups for from 10 to 20,000 people, generating actionable insights in minutes instead of months, while reducing project costs, delivery times, and execution risk. It is a truly anonymous, safe space that allows for actionable, qualitative insights at scales. In other words, it will allow thousands of people to connect, ideate, and respond to key questions in minutes. It will capture millions of ideas and perspectives through real-time video conversations at scale. It will replace manual, time-consuming analysis with automated AI-driven dashboard and maximize diverse engagement by capturing the views of an entire population instead of just a selection. It will provide us same-day access with no need for integration or downloads. The sessions will require only 1 hour to complete the process, and it will allow us to instantly summarize and aggregate ideas and viewpoints inclusively and impartially. NADA's AI dashboard will summarize quantitative and qualitative inputs into key takeaways and themes, and it will filter and segment the data and download custom reports for our presentations and further discussions. NADA is ISO 27001 certified and vetted. I want to reemphasize that all data captured in NADA is anonymous. We will be working with NADA to co-design 2 sessions and handle setup with no heavy lifting required from anybody on the team. Once we finalize the details of these 2 sessions, we will communicate them to all of you and hope that you and all of the stakeholders that you're aware of will join us on this journey. Next, we will bring the data to the table. The survey results from patient caregivers and product developers will be analyzed and synthesized and presented at the next MTM workshop in November of 2025. This will help us to validate insight with broader stakeholders. After that, we will continue on a structured consensus building on DRD endpoints. We will incorporate the APTUS consensus meeting from Japan later this month, aimed to develop best practices for adopting AI-driven diabetic retinopathy screening, as well as our ongoing conversations and collaborations of all global stakeholders under the umbrella of DRDQ Accelerator Working Group. The goal is to forge credible, widely supported endpoint recommendations to form the foundation for consensus documents and international standards. CCOI and MTM Vision Initiative, working together under the umbrella of DRD Cure Accelerator, will eradicate DRD-related vision loss worldwide. Thank you very much for your attention. Now I would like to continue with our session 5, Translation to Action. Next speaker will be Dr. Michael Abramoff, who will talk on practical methods in identifying and validating endpoints and biomarkers for medical product development. He will be followed by Katie Capanna, who is an Associate Office Director for Strategic Development, Office of Strategic Program, and technology innovation at FDA. She will talk about FDA Home as a healthcare hub, CDRH initiative to enable healthier living. Subsequent to her presentation, we will continue to a panel discussion. And now, Michael Abramoff.
Thank you, Dr. Eydelman and Malvina. I will now make a brief points about practical matters in identifying and validating endpoints for diabetic retinal disease. So I want to start with that we really need an adequate foundation for endpoint development, and a lot of work on that had been done, and essentially we'll base them on these fundamental bioethical principles of beneficence, or first do no harm, autonomy for the patient, and justice, so that we can place patient outcomes central and not spend too much time in the patient-physician relationship. Also, it allows quantification how far any endpoint finds balance between these different bioethical principles, and that aids in creating support among all healthcare stakeholders, where this is about more than just satisfying regulators like FDA. We want to make sure that even payers all support the endpoints we are developing. What is an endpoint? It's a falsifiable test that essentially gives a patient benefit in some form. There's two types, really. There's clinical endpoints, where directly related to patient outcome. They're considered the most reliable, but especially in chronic disease, such endpoints may take years and sometimes decades to manifest, and that leads to unacceptable delays and cost for innovation, including new treatments and new drugs and new diagnostics for diabetic retinal disease. That's why in the past we've come up with surrogate endpoints. They should predict or correlate with a clinical endpoint, but then can be used as interim endpoints in clinical trials, so it can be faster and possibly at lower cost. For example, LDL serum level predicts myocardial infarct, and that has now been accepted as a surrogate endpoint in FDA trials. And it also means that the claims for that specific treatment says it improves LDL rather than directly reducing the incidence of MI. But we already know that lowering LDL reduces incidence of myocardial infarct. An example that was done, not in this context, for AI trials, and that we published a while ago, is reference standards and a metric for the quality of the reference standard, where the first one indeed reflects this association with clinical outcome, as you can see here. And as we go down the list, it becomes more about agreement and disagreement of clinicians and other experts in the form of reading centers and even individual clinicians. So you can again see this validation against clinical outcome as really being the ideal for a reference standard or for an endpoint. So surrogate endpoints need to show either evidence of prediction or correlation with a clinical outcome. And finally, if you do not have that evidence for prediction and correlation, it's considered a reasonably likely endpoint. And then before you can make it an endpoint sufficient for a clinical trial, typically it will require to creating that evidence in some form. And that's, of course, what we'll be focusing on in the next months, maybe years. I wanted to go through a few existing endpoints, especially in vision, and I will underline the ones that the FDA has already accepted as primary endpoints. I'm focusing on primary endpoints for clinical trials here, not so much on secondary outcomes. They're very interesting to discuss, but it would take too much time to explain all of that. So if you look at the endpoints, the primary ones for vision, for retina, have been functional primary endpoints: visual acuity, perimetry, meaning visual fields of some form, contrast sensitivity, and what is called a full field stimulus threshold, especially for where patients already have lower visual acuities to measure improvements or at least stabilization. Also have been accepted as primary is patient-focused primary endpoints, and that includes the multiluminance mobility test, which has been used for Luxturna as the first one, gene therapy, essentially a maze where patients have to navigate a maze. Also, patient-reported outcomes can be considered endpoints, but they have not yet been accepted as a primary by FDA. Functional surrogate endpoints, none of them primary today, that include blood flow, laser spectrography, electrophysiology, pupillometry, and color vision testing. So rather than the first list of functional endpoints that are accepted as primary, these are not yet considered as primary and can be considered surrogate if there's evidence that they indeed correlate to outcome. Then there are structural surrogate endpoints, including from fundus photographs, from OCT, from autofluorescence, and one of them has been accepted as the EDTRS. To my knowledge, only one, the EDTRS scale for progression of diabetic retinopathy has been accepted as a primary outcome. And then finally, there's a concept called composite endpoints, which are combinations of one or more of the above or new endpoints where they become primary as a composite. And I think that's a really interesting avenue to consider. I want to end my presentation with thoughts about putative endpoints for DRD. On the left, you see the figure from one of the papers that started what we're working on, where essentially we said there's three axes, one for ischemic component of diabetic retinal disease or retinopathy, one for the neurodegenerative axis of diabetic retinal disease, neurodegeneration, and the final one for diabetic macular edema. And so you have three axes, and patients can be on different positions in this three-dimensional space. And for the ischemic component, we have accepted structural endpoint, which is the EDTRS progression. We can consider electrophysiology, and we have talked about it in the past. We have neurodegenerative component endpoints, and that is perimetry, and that is accepted for glaucoma trials. For the diabetic macular edema, of course, we have visual acuity as well as primary and accepted, as well as OCT biomarkers as surrogate. And then patient-reported outcomes, not yet primary to date. And all components together for advanced stages of disease, definitely MLMT or multiluminance mobility test, as well as full field stimulus threshold test have been accepted as primary endpoints. The reason to bring it up in this way is that I think it's interesting or illustrative to look at endpoints that already have been accepted as primary and maybe work our way backwards to where we are currently, as well as working our way forwards from the science that has already been done toward endpoints that indeed either convey how the disease is behaving early on before symptoms develop or before the irreplaceable damage has been done, as well as saving time on clinical trials going forward, because we all want ultimately people with diabetes to benefit from these new treatments that are hopefully safe and effective as soon as possible. And that's ultimately the goal for this discussion. I look very much forward to Dr. Eydelman, Malvina moderating our panel discussion and discussing some of these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, again for a terrific talk summarizing practical methods in identifying endpoints and biomarkers for medical product development. And now I'm delighted to introduce Katie Capanna, who will talk about CDRH initiatives to enable healthier living as part of FDA's Home as a Healthcare Hub. Katie?